Hello, my name's Harold Halfdane, and welcome to Archaeological Minecraft. I'm a former archaeologist who enjoys playing Minecraft and thought it would be fun to combine the two. In today's episode, we'll be talking about Cahokia. Cahokia is a pre-Columbian Native American city famous for its earthen pyramidal-shaped mounds located on the Mississippi River, directly across the river from the modern city of St. Louis in the United States. We don't know what they called themselves, or what the city was called by its native inhabitants, as they left no written records. However, it is called Cahokia, which translates to wild geese, based on the tribe name of the people who lived in the area when the original French explorers and fur trappers met the locals in the area in the 17th century. The city of Cahokia was originally founded around 600 AD by a culture of Native Americans of the late Woodland era. The Woodland era can be divided into three distinct periods, creatively named the early, middle, and late Woodland eras. Just to set some context, it was during the Middle Woodland era, which dates to 200 BC to 500 AD, that the Native Americans of that cultural tradition started building earthen burial mounds and raised earth, animal, or geometric-shaped earthworks. During the late Woodland era, which dates to 500 AD to 1000 AD, that the bow and arrow was introduced or discovered, replacing the spear and atlatl as a primary hunting tool. An atlatl is a spear thrower that allows the user to gain a mechanical advantage while throwing a spear to make it travel farther and hit harder. It's also during the late Woodland era that the key staple crop of maize, otherwise known as corn, was introduced, probably from the southwest, and the construction of burial mounds markedly decreased in frequency. As I mentioned before, it was during the late Woodland era that Cahokia was originally founded around 600 AD, but it was at that time it was a smaller settlement and not the large city it would later become. But we'll get to that a bit later. Before we do, there's one last piece of context I want to lay out, and that's where the site of Cahokia fits in the geographic landscape, as the site selected for the building of the late Woodland settlement played a large role in why the later Mississippian city of Cahokia was so successful. As stated in the beginning of this episode, Cahokia sits on the Mississippi River, but more than that, this area happens to be some of the most productive land for farming in the whole of North America. The geographic area is a confluence of forested areas, wetlands, streams, and small rivers, and the soil is generally alluvium, meaning it's a loose clay, silt, sand, or gravel deposited by running water, such as with stream beds or in a floodplain. This makes the soil incredibly fertile for the growing of maize, beans, and squash. Those combined with the deer and other wild forest animals which could be hunted, and the various forms of fish which could be caught in the river systems, allowed for the perfect conditions for the area being able to sustain a huge localized population center. Without Cahokia being built where it was, it's likely that the population boom which occurred in the Mississippian era, the city of Cahokia would never have been able to develop into what it would become. Around 1050 AD, as the late Woodland era transitioned into the Mississippian era, so too did the settlement at Cahokia undergo its own transition. The old late Woodland site at Cahokia was purposefully torn down, not in a violent form of destruction, but rather in what looks like a major urban renewal project. The old buildings were pulled down and the soil regraded to make way for new structures, mounds, and plazas. The new settlement was around 3 times larger than the old settlement, and Cahokia at its height would cover an area of around 5 to 6 square miles, which is 8 to 10 square kilometers. It contained around 120 earthen pyramids at its height, and while much of the core of the site is preserved, all but 9 or 10 of the largest pyramids have been damaged due to farming practices, substantial erosion, or modern development. Of the 120 pyramidal mounds, only about half remain in similar proportions to what they originally looked like, with around 40 mounds being completely destroyed. Much of this destruction occurred in the building of St. Louis, with whole mounds being torn down as backfill, clay and dirt, to level the ground and to make way to build the modern city and suburbs on. In the 1930s, about 20 to 50 mounds were taken down with steam shovels in East St. Louis, which is a city on the Illinois side of the river, to make way for that city's development. Still more destruction occurred to Cahokia during the building of the interstate highway system, some of which goes right through where Cahokia lies. Getting off that tangent and back onto historic Cahokia, an estimated 10,000 to 40,000 people lived at Cahokia at its height, meaning that more people lived in Cahokia than lived in London or potentially even Paris at the same time. But it also wasn't until 1780 that another city in what would become the United States would reach that same level of population density. Now, I'm not going to try and attempt to build out all of Cahokia, not only because that would be too big an undertaking, but also because a vast majority of the area where Cahokia stood hasn't been excavated, or, as I pointed out, is under modern buildings or roadways and would be impossible to know what's all there. What I'm going to attempt to replicate here in Minecraft is much of the area dubbed, quote, downtown Cahokia, which contained its largest mounds, the Grand Plaza, and was an area surrounded by a wooden palisade or defensive wall. Even then, I'm not going to attempt to replicate every single building within the wooden palisade, and we'll be sticking to a number of pyramids which will allow me to talk about the different type of mounds and their forms and potential function. Monk's Mound is the largest pyramid at Cahokia and was named for a community of Trappist monks who resided there for a short time after Euro-Americans settled in the area, which was long after the site of Cahokia was abandoned. The mound is 30 meters or 100 feet high, 291 meters or 955 feet long, and 236 meters or 755 feet wide. Just to put that into context compared to other pyramids around the world, that means that Monk's Mound is around the same size as its base as the Great Pyramid of Giza, and larger at its base than the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan. Monk's Mound is the third largest pyramid in the world and was the largest man-made structure in what would later become the United States until 1867. The mound contains 622,000 cubic meters of earth and underwent as many as 10 separate construction phases, with the early phases of the mound being smaller and the later phases making the mound taller and adding additional terraces. There are 4 terraces on Monk's Mound, the first of which is the lowest terrace to the south, and the fourth being the highest terrace on the northeast side, on which archaeologists have found the evidence of a large building, possibly a temple or residence for a high-status ruler or individuals. The building was 32 meters or 105 feet long, 15 meters or 48 feet wide, and might have been as tall as 15 meters high. The mounds at Cahokia were made up almost entirely of layers of basket-transported soil and clay, and given that many of them appeared to have been built in only a few decades, that must have required a tremendous workforce. The blackish clay was collected locally from the riverbeds, and at the top of the platforms of some of the mounds, there was even a layer of fine, light sand which was spread over the top and then covered with a layer of the packed black clay and what's thought to have been ceremonial or a form of ritual purification. So, while many pictures of the Cahokian mounds, like Monk's Mound, show them being grass-covered, and that's how they look today, back when they were constructed and during the habitation of Cahokia, they would not have been grass-covered at all, and rather would have been covered by a layer of black clay. In fact, mounds and the buildings that topped them were in a constant state of construction and refurbishment. Each year, buildings were torn down, repaired, or renovated. The surface of the mounds would likely have been repaired, and the old surface layer of clay removed and a fresh layer of dark clay put on to replace the old clay. Now that we've discussed the surface of the mound, let's talk about its interior. An investigation by archaeologists in the late 1990s showed that there was a stone cobblestone layer deep within Monk's Mound. Around 5 meters, or around 15 feet above the stone cobblestones, There was a layer of coarse material, then sandy, silty soil, and an alternating layers of clay. Experts think this was done to help act as groundwater drains to help maintain the large mound's stability. Being a platform mound that's almost entirely made of different forms of earth made the mound susceptible to retaining rainwater, which would cause slumping, erosion, or worse yet, the potential of an avalanche-like effect where large sections could break off and slide down the slopes. This makes telling what the original base dimensions of these mounds problematic, as it's very hard to determine what the mounds originally looked like and what the angle of their slopes were. Excavations have shown that slumping was indeed a problem. Despite the efforts made to wick the rainwater and groundwater from Monk's Mound through the internal layering, it didn't fully work, as around 1200 AD, the western side of the third and fourth terrace collapsed, destroying part of the building at its summit. It was at that time that the second terrace was built to patch and repair the mound from that area of slumping. To the south of Monk's Mound is the Grand Plaza. The Grand Plaza covers an area of 490 meters, or 1,600 feet in length, by 170 meters, or 900 feet in width. The Grand Plaza was an area built early in Cahokia's original urban renewal effort around 1050 AD, and shows careful engineering where the area was deliberately leveled, with ridges in the area being reduced and low areas filled in. Archaeologists have also found signs that great care was taken in regards to allowing for water drainage. This shows a great deal of pre-planning went into the area. In the center of the Grand Plaza is a mound called Mound 49 by archaeologists, and is located about 100 meters or 328 feet south of Monk's Mound. This mound used to be called Red Mound due to the high quantity of red pottery that was originally discovered there. Some early maps of this mound show it to be a conical mound, whereas other maps created in 1966 show it to be an oval shape, being 50 meters or 164 feet long at its east-west axis and around 35 meters or 114 feet long on its north-south axis. This mound is around 1.5 to 3 meters in height, and some have suggested that it might have been a ridgetop mound, which is a special type of mound that we'll talk about later. Another mound, named Mound 56, which is located in the Grand Plaza, is just to the south of Mound 49. This mound was around 4 to 5 meters in height. However, the mound's dimensions have been highly modified due to extensive farming cultivation, so I had to guess a bit in my recreation. Also in the Grand Plaza was Cahokia's Chunkey field. What is Chunkey, I hear you asking? Chunkey was a game that seemed to have been created around 600 AD in the Cahokian era, and whose popularity expanded in parallel to Cahokia itself during the Mississippian era. The game was played whereby a stone disc would be rolled on a flattened field, often specifically designed for playing Chunkey. Players, often just two, would run after the disc, which would be rolled on its end, and would try and throw spear-like Chunkey sticks at the stone, with the winner being awarded points depending on whose Chunkey stick was the closest when the disc came to rest. Chunkey stones and Chunkey sticks were prized possessions. Frequent and high-stakes gambling was a hallmark of Chunkey games, and the game of Chunkey's popularity lasted long after Cahokia itself was abandoned, even after the end of the Mississippian cultural era in around 1500 AD. Many Native Americans and their tribes, such as the Muskegee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, and Mandans, continued playing Chunkey after European contact. One account of this game was written down at the end of the 19th century by artist George Catlin in 1832. He said, The game of Chunkey is beautiful athletic exercise which the Mandan, a Native American tribe of the Great Plains, seem to be almost unceasingly practicing whilst the weather is fair and they have nothing else to demand their attention. This game is decidedly their favorite amusement and is played near to the village on a pavement of clay which has been used for that purpose until it has become as smooth and hard as a floor. The play commences when two, one from each party, who start off upon a trot abreast to each other, and one of them rolls in advance of them on the pavement a little ring of 2 or 3 inches in diameter, cut out of stone, and each one follows up with his chunkey, a stick of 6 feet in length with little bits of leather projecting from the sides of an inch or more in length, which he throws before him as he runs, sliding it along the ground after the ring, endeavoring to place it in such a position that when it stops, the ring may fall upon it and receive one of its little projections of leather through it. Cahokia had a particular type of chunkey stone which looked particularly different from chunkey stones manufactured in other regions. As such, archaeologists have been able to find Cahokia chunkey stones as far away as sites in modern-day Oklahoma. Chunkey games also had a ceremonial or perhaps even religious or mythological significance. People would travel from hundreds of miles around Cahokia to trade and participate during the ceremonial festivities. Archaeologists can tell this from the artifacts and pottery found in graves and homes around Cahokia, which come from the modern U.S. states of Indiana, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Ohio. Just to the south of the Grand Plaza, about 500 meters, or 1,640 feet, from the south of Monk's Mound, on the opposite side of the Grand Plaza of it, are 2 mounds that together act as a pair. These are mounds 59 and 60. Mound 59, which is a conical-shaped mound, which is also known as round-top mound, is about 12 to 13 meters or 40 to 44 feet tall. Mound 60, to its east, is a platform mound and is also known as Fox Mound. This mound was around 14 to 15 meters or 46 to 50 feet tall and was around 38 meters or around 128 feet long on its east-west axis and around 49 meters or 160 feet long in its north-south axis. As I mentioned previously, these mounds seem to be a pair, and that's not only because of the proximity to one another, but it looks like they may have been placed together on a small platform. However, it's also possible that it only looks like they're on a platform because the earth had blended together with erosion and slope wash. The other reason archaeologists think these 2 mounds might have been a pair is that in the other areas of Cahokia, there are areas where conical-shaped mounds are paired right next to a platform-top mound. It's thought that perhaps the deceased were prepared for burial on the platform-top mound and that the conical-topped mound contained the burials itself. This makes sense as evidence points to bodies having undergone excarnation. Excarnation is where the bodies of the deceased are laid out on a platform or scaffolding, and birds are allowed to remove the flesh and meat from the bones. Once the process is complete, the bones are carefully collected and ritually deposited with the rest of the family group in the conical-shaped mounds. To the west of the Grand Plaza are 3 platform mounds and 2 conical mounds, which are in a line and their shapes orient to the cardinal directions. There is some evidence that some of the platform and conical mounds might have been paired in similar ways to what was described with mounds 59 and 60 to the south of the Grand Plaza. The original height and dimensions of some of these mounds is up for debate, as a number of them have experienced quite a large bit of tillage from farming, which has destroyed their shape. To the east of Monk's Mound and the Grand Plaza are 7 mounds, 4 of which are platform mounds and 3 of which are conical mounds. As was the case with the mounds on the western side of the Grand Plaza, a number of these platforms and conical mounds appeared paired together in function, and a number of them are now either heavily modified or destroyed due to farming, flooding, or modern development in the 20th century. Also on the western and eastern sides of the Grand Plaza were houses. The houses were constructed by digging a trench around 1 meter wide by a meter or two deep, and a sapling with its bark stripped off would be placed in post holes at the bottom of that trench. The soil would be filled back in, and the flexible saplings would be bent over to make an arc shape and tied to the sapling on the other side. That created a structural framework where long grasses and reeds would be woven or hung and then anchored, and would act like a thatched roof effect, with the thatched roof itself on top, to keep the house dry and allow water to run off. The whole area which we have discussed thus far, from Monk's Mound in the north, the Grand Plaza, and mounds that flanked it to the east and west, as well as to mounds 59 and 60 to the south of the Grand Plaza, was surrounded by a palisade wall, which included towers at the gate areas. This wall was 3.2 kilometers or 2 miles long. It was a later addition to, quote, downtown Cahokia, and archaeologists can tell that by how it cut through and disrupted pre-existing housing areas near the Grand Plaza. It appears to have been built 4 times based on evidence found during excavations. Those excavations show that each time it was rebuilt, it took an estimated 15 to 20,000 oak and hickory logs to complete the palisade wall. This palisade wall acted as a practical defensive structure, but who it was a defense from is still an open question, whether it was from outside attackers or internal competing interests or attackers from within Cahokia itself. Some sections show signs that it was hurriedly built, leading to the conclusion that there was some conflict that they were trying to protect themselves from. It also could have been a way to better control the area for either crowd control reasons during festivals or to create a physical demarcation to mirror a social demarcation. While not in the central area of, quote, downtown Cahokia, where we have focused our attention up to this point, I wanted to discuss 2 other areas of interest outside of that palisade wall. The first area is to the west of the Grand Plaza by 850 meters, or 2,750 feet, where there is a circle of vertical cedar log pillars which surround a much larger central pillar. The purpose of this Woodhenge is not fully known, but it does show it was torn down and rebuilt a number of times, with the quantity of vertical pillars increasing with each round of rebuilding. The first Woodhenge had 24 posts, whereas the second to last rebuilding had 60 posts. Interestingly, the very last rebuilding only had 12 or 13 posts in an arc along the eastern sunrise edge. But if it would have been completed, if the circle had been completed, it would have had 72 posts, making it the largest number of posts. The third version of Woodhenge that matches the date for the construction of Monk's Mound and the Grand Plaza had 48 posts, so that's the version of Woodhenge that I'm recreating here. Archaeologists have found that these pillars match or closely match up with the celestial alignments, so it's possible it acted as a form of calendar. This aligns with later commonalities with Great Plains Native American tribes, where there was a practice to have a circular corral of vertical pillars to demark the space where ceremonial sun dances would take place. The posts in the circular corrals would roughly align with the celestial events, thus tying the 2 items together. Likewise, there are around 100 locations identified in the Great Plains where a circle of stones would act in a similar vein, demarcating celestial events, with lines of the stones radiating outwards like a sunburst from its center. The second area of interest outside of the palisade wall is Mound 72. Located to the south of Monk's Mound, by 850 meters, or 2,750 feet, Mound 72 is a different kind of mound than what we've talked about before, as it's neither a conical nor platform mound, but rather is a ridge-shaped mound. This mound was found to have numerous pits filled with mass burials, thought to be retainer sacrifices. A retainer sacrifice is when a high-status individual dies, and their servants or potentially family members are sacrificed and buried with them. One pit burial in the mound had the remains of 53 young women who had been strangled and neatly arranged in 2 layers. Another pit held 39 men, women, and children who showed signs of dying a violent death via an execution before being unceremoniously dumped into the mound. Several bodies showed signs of not having been fully dead when buried by the claw marks made with their fingers in the soil after they had been dumped into the pit. On top of those burials, another group had been neatly arranged on litters made of cedar poles and cane matting. Another group of 4 individuals found in the mound were interred on a low platform with their arms interlocked. They had their heads and hands removed. Isotopic analysis of the burials of the women versus the high-status men found in Mound 72 showed that the women were iron deficient and their diet was extraordinarily high in maize and lacked protein, where the high-status men had high amounts of protein in their diets. This could point to class differences, or it could point to perhaps some of the sacrificial victims being from outside of the Cahokian community on account of their different diets. The high-status individual, perhaps even an early ruler of Cahokia, that all of these burials were connected with is called the Birdman burial. The Birdman was a tall man in his 40s and was buried on a platform with more than 20,000 shell disc beads arranged into a shape of a falcon or thunderbird. The bird's head was beneath and beside the head of the man, with his wings and tails beneath his arms and legs. Below the Birdman was a man of similar age and height who was buried facing downward. Another unusual thing about Mound 72 is its appearance and orientation. Unlike the other mounds, which were carefully planned out both in space and orientation to the cardinal directions, Mound 72 in contrast does not orientate in that way. Rather, the ridgeline of the mound corresponds to the path of the sun when rising or setting during the summer and winter solstices as they pass over the horizon at that time of year. Corresponding to the Birdman burial, there were Chunkey stones and 2 Chunkey sticks, as well as 2 bags of arrowheads. One bag had all light-colored arrowheads, and the other all dark-colored arrowheads. Their placement in the burial seems to correspond and be thematically related to the winter and summer solstices. The number of individuals, both in the mass burials and in the individual retainer sacrifices in this burial, are numbers that seem to be associated with mythological significance. Likewise, the association to a falcon or thunderbird, as well as its association to the Birdman burial with a, quote, twin that mirrored the ruler's position in the burial, also makes connections to well-established Native American mythologies throughout North America and Mesoamerica. As such, this points to the details of the burial all being carefully choreographed, with events to retell a story that the community would be familiar with, and to tie the deceased ruler or high-status individual to establish mythological traditions and stories. Excavations and accounts at Mound 72 and the other 9 to 16 other ridgetop mounds at Cahokia, some of which have been completely destroyed in the building of St. Louis and East St. Louis, show that these ridgetop mounds started as platform mounds on which a ridge was placed after the burial ceremony. The other ridgetop mounds show similar burial evidence as was outlined for Mound 72, where a high-status individual was ceremonially buried with retainer sacrifices, mass burials, as well as the remains of other individuals whose burial bundles appeared to show that the individual had died previously, but their remains were kept and stored for later burial with the high-status individual. The high-status individuals in the other ridgetop mounds were also buried with chunky stones and chunky sticks, as well as other elaborate grave goods made out of copper and mica. The population at Cahokia began to decline during the 13th century, and the site was abandoned around 1350 AD. There have been quite a number of potential reasons proposed for that decline. Environmental degradation through overhunting, deforestation used to be an often suggested reason, but newer evidence points to there not being a lot of evidence to come to that conclusion. There does appear to be evidence of a couple of rounds of severe flooding based on sediments which show flooding in the housing and dwelling areas. Political and economic problems may also have contributed to the community's decline, or perhaps an invasion from an external people might have been a factor. However, there doesn't appear to be any destruction layer or signs of violence in the archaeological layer, which would lend itself to the invasion theory. For whatever reason, though, the population of Cahokia seemed to drift off and decline until the site was ultimately just abandoned. Well, that's about it for today's episode. I appreciate all of you who stuck with it. I hope you found the episode interesting and learned a bit about this fascinating site and the people who lived there, or maybe this gave you inspiration for your own Minecraft world. If you want to learn more about this, I want to point you in the direction of a number of resources that were instrumental in my putting together this episode. First is a book by Timothy R. Pauketet named Cahokia, Ancient America's Great City on the Mississippi. The second is the Cahokia Mounds Museum Society's website. On their site is a fantastic interactive map where you can click and read about each individual mound at the site. I also want to point out that if you visit Cahokia, there's a very cool augmented reality app that you can use with your smartphone where you can see what the site would have looked like as you walk around the modern site. More information about that experience can also be found at Cahokia Mounds Museum Society's website. I put the information for both resources in the description below. If you like the video, please take the time to leave me a comment and let me know what you enjoyed about it. Or if you have a suggestion for what I can improve in these videos, please let me know that as well. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to be notified when I release future videos. Thanks and have a great day. Bye for now.